about what we're going to be covering today, because I got to ask you, is this a really big problem? I mean, I know that you've been doing this for a long, long time, and I know you've written books on it, but give our listeners just an idea how big a problem this is.
So I've been specializing in working with couples who have marital problems for the last 3 decades. And what I found in my practice, and also the research tells us, that approximately 1 in every 3 couples is experiencing a sexual desire gap. And I'll explain more about that in just a minute. So I want your listeners and viewers to really understand that if they're struggling in their sexual relationship and they're arguing about sex because one person's hot and the other one isn't, that they're not alone. There should be some comfort in knowing that.
Because I think that actually is related to that question I just asked, was how do you actually define you're in a sex-starved marriage? I mean, is that like the number of times that you make love through the week, a month? I mean, how do you actually diagnose this?
Well, I always say having a healthy sexual relationship isn't like having a daily minimum requirement like a vitamin. It really is different for all couples, but I can give you a definition, Noel, of a sex-starved marriage. And a sex-starved marriage is one where one spouse is desperately longing for more touch, more physical closeness, more sex, more physical connection, and the other spouse thinks, what is the big deal? Would you just get a life? It's just sex. But to the spouse yearning for more touch, it's a huge deal because it really is about feeling wanted, about feeling loved, about feeling appreciated, about feeling close emotionally. And when this major disconnect happens, what also happens is that intimacy on all levels goes right out the door. Mm-hmm. They stop sitting next to each other on the couch. They stop laughing at each other's jokes. They stop doing things together. In essence, they really stop being friends. Mm-hmm. And it places the marriage at risk of infidelity and divorce. But being the divorce buster, as that's how people know me, I can tell people that if they have been arguing about sex, that it doesn't nail the marital coffin shut, that there are so many things that couples can do to bridge the sexual desire gap and to really bring back the passion.
Yeah, and I want to get into that. Before we do that, though, I need to ask the question, what, as you see it, and I know that you work with a lot of couples around this very, very sensitive topic, what are these steps, these tragic steps that lead them to the unfortunate conclusion of being in a sex-starved marriage?
Well, one of the typical things that happens in relationships, and by the way, I have to say a couple things more about the sex-starved marriage. Okay. One is that most people don't talk about it, but it's a pretty self-evident fact that the person with lower sexual desire controls the sexual relationship. And they don't do it because they're mean-spirited or they're controlling or they're manipulative. They do it because if they're not in the mood, sex isn't likely to happen. Mm-hmm. And Noel, I find this to be somewhat interesting because when you think about how decisions are made in marriage, you usually think about mutual decisions. 2 people together decide whether to get married, whether to have kids, how to deal with finances and the in-laws and where they're going to spend holidays. But conspicuously missing from the mix is anything at all having to do with the sexual relationship. And there's something else interesting about that. The person with lower sexual desire actually expects his or her spouse to accept the decision, not to complain about it, and also, oh yes, by the way, you must be monogamous. And this tacit agreement doesn't work all that well. Mm-hmm. So what typically happens, and more specifically in answer to your question, one person in the relationship, usually the less sexual one, really needs to feel close and connected on an emotional level before they're interested in being sexual. Mm-hmm. And then you have the other spouse who really needs to feel close and connected on a sexual level before they're interested in investing in the relationship. And what typically happens is both spouses wait for the other person to change. And I'm telling you, it's a deadly waiting game. Wow. Because they grow further and further apart. Yeah. The other thing that also happens, and you talk about the steps of getting to this distance, is generally the person with lower desire has very little empathy for the person with higher desire, because usually people with lower desire think to themselves, well, really, it is just about scratching an itch. It's not anything, really big or important. But to the spouse yearning for more touch, as I said before, it's much, much bigger than that. It really is about feeling close and connected. And if you'd like, I'd tell you a story about a couple that I worked with.
I would love it.
Okay, this really illustrates this, and I think so many people resonate with this story because it is so typical. I was working with a couple that had been married for about 15 years, and they had a pretty good relationship, but they were in therapy to kind of iron out some of their garden variety issues. And the guy was a very laid-back guy, but toward the end of the session, he actually had a complaint for the very first time. And he said, Michele, there really is only a 2-hour window of opportunity on Fridays between 10 and 12 where my wife might be interested in sex. And when he said that, I glanced over at her, and she was sort of smiling because she recognized herself in that description. But when I glanced back at him, he was not smiling at all. And so I asked him, tell me what this has been like for you. And he sort of took a deep breath, and he turned to her, and he said, when we're in bed together and I reach out to you and you're not there for me, all I can think about is, are you still attracted to me the way I'm attracted to you? Do you love me anymore? Do you even want to be in this marriage? And then when you go to sleep and I'm staring up at the ceiling and hearing you breathing next to me, all I can tell you is that it's the loneliest feeling in the world, lying next to you in bed.
Wow.
And to this woman's credit, I have to tell you, her eyes filled up with tears, and she reached out and she grabbed for his hand, and here's what she said. Do you know that every time you touch me, the only thing I ever think about is, am I in the mood? Am I not in the mood? I never, not once, have thought about what it's like to be you. And I am so, so sorry. And I promise I will try harder. And he began to cry. And between me and you and everyone who's listening, I began to cry. It was an incredibly touching moment. Wow. And I just want to say one more thing about that. When people are listening to this story, I don't want them to get the impression that it's always the man who has higher desire, because I'm here to tell you that I think low desire in men is America's best kept secret. So it can go either way. It really isn't just about women having headaches. Men can get headaches too.
Yeah. You're right. And I was going to ask that question. Is this a gender thing, right? And you're saying, no, actually it goes both ways. Let me ask this question. What do you think are contributing factors to why men are more or less becoming the low desire side of the equation?
Well, for one thing, I think it is more typical to hear about men having high desire and women having low desire.
Right.
I think that there have been lots of reasons that men have low desire. For one thing, with the economy having been what it's been, so many businesses have downsized. Many men have either lost their jobs or their jobs have changed. And a man's self-esteem is very connected to their sense of achievement at work. And when that isn't working out so well, a lot of men feel really deflated and they're not feeling sexual. That's one thing. Yeah. Sometimes it is hormonal issues. Sometimes they need testosterone supplementation. But one of the biggest reasons that I see men being less interested in sex than we think that they often are is that very often their wives who are upset about the fact that they're not connecting physically become very, very critical. And criticism is not exactly an aphrodisiac. So most men really, and actually it's true both ways, most people who feel criticized and feel their spouse's anger steer clear of being physical with their spouses.
Yeah, yeah. I want to come back to the low desire person. And you said that really sets the pace oftentimes in the relationship. What advice do you have for the low desire person in the relationship, if that be the case?
That's a great question, Noel. So first of all, I think that it's really important to develop a little empathy. And I hope that they heard the story that I just told about that other couple. That's number one. Number two, with what we now know about how to boost sexual desire, whether there are physical causes, personal issues, or interpersonal issues, there is such great help out there that it really is imperative that people seek the help that's available. That's the second thing. Third thing, and this may sound funny, but it's really, really important, that they adopt the Nike philosophy and just do it. And let me tell you why. I wish that I had $1 for each time someone in my practice, often a woman, said to me, you know, Michele, I really wasn't in the mood when my husband reached out to me and started being sexual. I had a lot on my mind. I just really wasn't present. But once we got into it, I really enjoyed myself. I had an orgasm. It felt great. And then I noticed that afterwards, we were much closer. I actually, once I described this to a couple of my practice, I actually had a man recently say to me, that's my wife. I wish she would just write on her hand, I like sex, so she remembers it for the next time. And Noel, this happened so many times that I started to do a little research about this. And what I found out is that for millions of people, and many of them are women, sexual desire, what has to happen is they have to get their feet moving in order to feel sexual desire. They have to be physically aroused before their brains realize that they're into it and they enjoy it. So that's why I think it really behooves, especially women, to be approachable when their husbands initiate sex. If they're feeling even neutral, they should begin and watch the fact that they are actually going to enjoy it, and it's going to have such incredible relationship benefits. And there's one more tip that I have for the person with lower desire. You know, very often when they're not in the mood, nothing happens. And what's to say that that person can't offer their partner a gift? In other words, to pleasure their spouse. Even if they're not in the mood and they're just really not into it, there's something to be said for giving their spouse a gift. And so often when I say that, believe it or not, the low desire spouse says, yeah, I'm willing to do that, but my partner isn't willing to do that. And then I turn to the partner and the partner says, yeah, some of my enjoyment, a big part of my enjoyment, comes from watching my spouse get off on this, really be excited. Yeah. And if he or she's not excited, I don't want to do it. And you know what my advice is to that person? Get over it. Yeah. Accept a gift. You're not clones. You're not going to have be in the mood exactly at the same time. So being able to be more flexible in this area really, I think, helps a lot.
That's huge. That's so important. I mean, I think it's interesting that they do set the pace in the relationship, which is frustrating for the high desire individual. And I guess I kind of want to jump to that, because if they are setting the pace, the low desire is setting the pace, the high desire, what would you say to them as it relates to that frustration, even maybe bitterness, anger around the situation of, gosh, you know what? My needs aren't being met in this. So
that, your mind reading, because that's where I was headed next. So thank you for that question. I appreciate it. So here's what happens in these relationships. Initially, the person with higher desire is, I think, quite open and expresses his or her feelings with vulnerability. I say use the F word, meaning talk about your feelings, okay? And so they'll say things openly like, I'm missing you. I'm feeling disconnected from you. This is so important to me. Sex is how I really feel close to you. But when those needs aren't met, and they often aren't because the person with lower desire really isn't getting how important this is in the relationship, the vulnerability quickly shifts into anger. And then the person is not only angry about the fact that they're not having sex, the anger spills over to every other aspect of their life together. They're yelling about the wet towels left on the floor or the pop can left in the den. And it's all a smokescreen for the fact that this dynamic is going on. And so one of the things that I tell people with higher desire is that while I completely understand how angry and frustrated you are, again, that is not an aphrodisiac. I mean, that only pushes your partner further and further away. So here's what you have to do. You have to go back to square one and express your feelings from your heart you're much more likely to get a spouse to try to be empathetic and understanding if you're speaking from a place of vulnerability rather than from anger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have to think, we're talking about long-term committed relationships that when this dynamic starts to play in the relationship, is that where you see the unfortunate reality of kind of the blow up and moving towards separation? And here's my question. Is this unavoidable? I feel like there's two forces at work here that are really playing against themselves. You have the one side of it is routine, predictability. There's that sense of dependability, security, right? Which we all want in a long-term relationship.
Right.
But at the other side of the equation, you have novelty, adventure, spontaneity, and it feels like these forces are working against themselves in the relationship. And how do you, what advice would you give to couples who are kind of stuck in that polarity in their relationship?
Well, one thing I want to say, as being someone in a very long-term marriage myself,
right,
that like anything else in life, whether it's sexuality or communication or parenting, in order to really be good at this and to have it sustain itself over time, you have to make it a priority. And I know that's sort of standard advice, but when I oftentimes give that advice to couples, they'll say, well, there's the kids and it's their soccer schedule, or we don't have time. And I say, like anything else, you have to actually plan time to be passionate, to be sexual. You have to, and then they say, well, it's not spontaneous. I'll say, well, then you have to have planned spontaneity. You really do have to put effort and energy into communicating about what turns you on, what turns you off. And by the way, this is so startling to me, that I've worked with couples who've been married for 35 years or longer. And believe it or not, many of them have never, ever talked about sex with each other.
No way.
It's really true. It's startling. Yeah, I'm really startled.
Oh my gosh.
Or they talk to each other very early on in the relationship. But let's face it, what works for two people early on in a relationship is different over time because our bodies change, our needs change. And if we don't have open communication about what feels good and what doesn't feel so good, or what you want to sort of liven things up a little bit, your relationship will become stale and it will become very, very difficult. I wanted to add one more thing, a tip for the person with higher desire and what he or she can do. So often when the person with higher desire wants to encourage the other spouse to become more sexual, they go out and do things that would please them. So they go buy sexy lingerie or sexy movies or sexy scents, and they give them to their spouse. But the truth is that's not necessarily what turns that person on. What you have to do is tune into your partner's turn-ons, not your own turn-ons. And let's just say if it's, in this case, a guy who has higher desire, maybe what would turn his wife on is if he said to her, you know what, on Saturday morning, I know you've been working really hard. You stay in bed, you sleep, I'm getting up with the kids. I want you to relax. Or go spend a weekend away with your girlfriends. I know that you've really been stressed out. That may be the aphrodisiac, and she'll come home wanting to be with him. So you really have to, in a sense, speak your partner's love language, not your own love language.
Yes. Well, as a husband that has 3 kids with my wife, I would absolutely affirm the whole space to allow her to have that time, right? There's such... Is learning what is their needs, right? What is their emotional needs, and being able to meet those versus just looking at my own.
Exactly.
So this all sounds great. I'm just thinking about the listener viewer who is sitting here thinking, well, I love this, but the fact is that as much as I've tried to meet halfway or even all the way, my spouse just refuses to participate in this part of our relationship. I want you to address that because I think that's a pretty big and real issue that we're seeing a lot.
Well, at the risk of sounding like I'm going to promote something here,
I want you to promote.
Okay, well, I want to tell you that I did a TEDx talk, and I know that a lot of your viewers are familiar with TEDx talks. on the topic of the sex-starved marriage. And, there have been nearly 750,000 views at this point.
Wow.
And I've gotten so many emails. I love what I do, but this is the thing I love most. I've gotten so many emails from people who have said to me, I felt so alone and lonely, and hearing you made me realize I'm not alone, and I actually got my spouse to watch the talk, and for the first time in years, we're going to do something about this.
Wow.
So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
And then also along those same lines, the book, The Sex-Starved Marriage, is really written for both people to read together. And, I explain each person's position so that they can have compassion for one another. And I really have a good way of sort of, working my way in there and talking to the person with lower desire who, as I said, controls the sexual relationship, and giving that person reasons and motivation to turn things around in the relationship. So there is hope. Do not give up.
Yeah. So, and I love that. I mean, the book, the TED Talk, but I'm just going to come back again. What about that couple who they're saying they're not willing? I've done all of that and they still are unresponsive to this area of our relationship. Is there anything? I mean, is it basically there is no hope, or, I mean, what would you say to that person?
Well, you're talking to the psychotic optimist. I just don't think there really is such a thing. I mean, a lot of times, there are a number of things. Usually the person with higher desire has been pursuing and pursuing and pursuing. And everyone probably knows that when you pursue someone, you're going to push the other person in the opposite direction. Mm-hmm. So one sort of last-ditch effort that might be tried is to really, as the higher desire spouse, to stop pushing so much, to leave room in the universe for the other partner to take some initiative. That's one thing. The other thing is, so often the person with lower desire says, I'm not going to be physical at all, because that's a complaint that I hear a lot. It's not only that we're not having sex, we're not holding hands, we're not kissing, we're not sitting next to each other on the couch, we're not cuddling in bed, we're not going to bed at the same time. And when I talk to low desire spouses about this, what they say is, I'm afraid that if I do anything physical, kiss him, give him a hug, goodbye in the morning, that it will inevitably lead to his or her wanting this to be turning into sex. So one of the agreements that they can make, for starters, is to be able to touch just affectionately and sensually without it leading to sex. And of course, the very last thing I can say is that it's absolutely essential that if on your own you haven't been able to get through to your spouse, there's professional help out there.
Yes.
We work with people literally all over the world. And we give them suggestions of what they could do differently. Sometimes you can't see the forest for the tree because you're so close to the problem.
Right.
To really discover something perhaps that you haven't tried. But you don't have to give up. There's always something you haven't tried.
I love that. I thank you for responding, because I was just pressing, because I know I've talked to them where they're just feeling so desperate and they feel like they've tried everything.
I know.
And it's almost like at this point, I just can't keep going forward, and it's a really tough place to be.
Well, it is. And I guess the other thing is, sometimes those folks, when they feel that they've tried everything, then they announce that they're getting a divorce. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a step before that, or several steps. And one, as I just told you, they should get some professional help.
Right.
But secondly, they should tell their spouse, if after trying everything, and especially things that I've outlined in the book, because there are many more alternatives than what you and I are talking about right here. They need to tell their spouse, this is so important to me. I feel like I am so starving in this relationship, and I feel so devastated that if something doesn't change, I really am going to need to leave this relationship. Before they actually give up. Because a lot of times people announce that they're getting a divorce when it's too late. And when their spouse then starts to change, which they do, they become more affectionate, more physical, the other spouse will say, that's too little, too late. So really be open and honest with your spouse about how devastating this has been for you, and the steps you're going to take if something doesn't change, not as a threat, not as an ultimatum, but as the truth.
Yes. That's really good. Well, you know, one of the populations that we serve is our military, and in that we've had a chance, and it's been a real privilege and honor to come alongside couples who are wounded, ill, and injured. And yes. Many of them are invisible wounds, so they're dealing with PTSD and TBI and some of those injuries. And I know that you address this in the book about medication and how medication have implications to this area in the relationship. I was just wondering if you could address that. I mean, I know that maybe not necessarily specific to that audience, but just how medication, I think, is becoming more and more commonplace to hear how this is affecting this, the sex life of couples.
So a lot of people are taking antidepressants, and I'm not sure if that's what you're talking about,
yes.
Noel, but 40 and there's a certain kind of antidepressant called SSRI, and 40% of people who take SSRIs, both for depression and anxiety, by the way, experience sexual side effects where they have difficulty feeling aroused, they have difficulty getting erections, and difficulty climaxing, and then they think there's something wrong with them, or they think there's something wrong with their spouse when they're experiencing some of these dysfunctions. When the truth is, what they need to do is go back to their doctors and ask, is there an alternative to this medication so that I'm not experiencing some of these sexual difficulties?
Okay. That's very, very helpful.
And by the way, in terms of, you know, people experiencing PTSD or some of the other dysfunctions or disabilities that you just mentioned, there's such great help available for people so that they can feel better and be more present in their relationships.
Yeah. Well, I think we've been kind of more landing on some of the negative consequences of, you know, if this is not working in low desire versus high desire. I want to just jump momentarily kind of to wrap up here to talk about the benefits that you see in couples who have an active sex life. Can we just maybe cover some of those things? I think really at the end of the day, it's about that, putting it in perspective and saying, here's where the hope lies in this type of aspiring to. It's not easy. It's a challenge. We have to communicate. We have to overcome our, you know, conflict. But when we are able to meet at that place of an active sex life, what are the benefits for couples? Look,
sex and touch is a tie that binds. I mean, it is primal for us in terms of a sense of connection, closeness, feeling safe in a relationship. Plus, when it works the right way, having sex with your spouse should be what sets that relationship apart from all other relationships. It is what makes it special and unique. And I have found that, you know, when I go out to a restaurant and I watch couples, I can always tell who's having sex and who isn't having sex, you know? you can just, there seems to be a lightness, a connection,
right.
Smiling, more conversation. And I can always tell the people who are not having sex, it's all missing. It's just missing. So, you know, not everybody's going to feel that sex is a tie that binds for them. But if you happen to be married to someone who feels that way, then taking care of each other, this mutual caretaking that underlies all healthy relationships is something that really, really needs to be in place.
Yeah. You're so right. That's so funny. I've had that thought when I've sat in a restaurant. It's like, wow, you know, I wonder. Yeah. So thanks for actually stating what I was thinking. So what we've been talking
more next time when you go out to a restaurant.
Yeah, exactly. You know, so what we've been talking about